A warm welcome to everyone joining us on this Saturday morning on this special live Facebook event organized by our recently launched parent support portal. Makan Already? We reckon that it's always easy to initiate any conversation on food, and therefore the name of our parent support group to get as many families out there to keep their communications going. I'm Noraza Ismail, your host today, and I'm very glad to be part of this parent support group, a project from the Youth Mental Wellbeing Network that's kindly supported by Ministry of Social and Family Development, Ministry of Health, and Ministry of Education. Well, you can find us, Makan Already, via our new website and on this new Facebook site. We're here to help parents learn more about how to support our kids' mental and emotional well-being, as well as get parents to share their parenting journey with one another. I think the journey is always less lonely when we all go it together. And as part of our Ground Up interactive platform, we are running a series of live chats, interviews with our invited group of experts, personalities, and seasoned parents to share with us their experience in tackling the mental challenges that our youths face today. And today, we are very fortunate to have with us Professor Daniel Fung, the CEO at the Institute of Mental Health Singapore, an expert in child and adolescent psychiatry who's been in the field for more than 20 years. Plus, he's also a father of five kids, all adults. Hello, and a warm welcome to you, Daniel. We're glad to have you with us on this very first Makan Already live FB session for 2022. And Happy New Year to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Nora, and I'm very happy to see everyone, and happy to be here and share my experience.
Okay, now our food for thought in this event, what's stressing out our youths today and how we as parents can help them nourish and strengthen their mental well-being. Now, before we speak with Professor Fang, we want to say a big thank you to all of you who have logged in and joined us on this Saturday morning. We hope in the next hour or so you will gain some insights into the mental challenges affecting our youths today, how we can come to terms with it and continue to help support our kids in their mental and emotional well-being. Please feel free to offer your questions on the topic. Prof. Fung will try to answer as many as time permits. You can type in your questions via this Facebook site. Well, I'll kick off this discussion on a positive note, I hope. Okay, Daniel. In recent months, the conversation of mental well being has come into the mainstream, where once it was spoken in very hushed tones. Are you heartened by this? And how should we as a community steer this conversation to effect a real change in tackling mental wellness, especially among our teens today and in the near future? Over to you, Daniel.
Well, I think you put the right word there, harsh tones, or in fact, in times past, harsh tones, right? So stigma and the way we discuss mental health issues generally is not been very positive. We only read the news about bad things that happen, that the mentally ill are dangerous or cause problems in the community, and they're not very sociable people. So I think it's important, first of all, to really understand the context of what mental health is about, and why stigma is an important aspect to consider as a start. And let me explain this in a kind of a image for you. Mental health is something that affects all of us. And if you imagine a three-sided pyramid, uh, um, one side is mental health, the other side is mental illness. They are interrelated, but they are separate. On the mental illness side of the house, we have 1 in 7 persons have a lifetime risk of developing a mental illness. And one of the most common mental illnesses is depression and anxiety. These are emotional disorders. And imagine 1 in 7 lifetime would be something like about 13.9% of the population. So it doesn't affect everyone. The rest of us will not develop mental illness. Mental health, on the other hand, is very dependent on what happens in the environment, the stresses that we feel and experience, and how these stresses impact on us. So all of us can have mental health issues and concerns. It depends on the stress. When the stress is minimal, for example, if I forgot my keys today and I can't find them, I might be a little distressed because I need to open doors and I don't have a key. But after a while, I will settle. Well, what's the solution, right? There must be a spare key somewhere. I got to go ahead and fix this. You will solve the problem. Very often, we can deal with the distress that we feel. At the next level, if the stress is huge and hard to sort of simply solve, and it's a little longer standing, it may result in what I call mental health problems. For example, if someone very close to you passes on, or there's an accident that results in someone becoming very sick for a long time, and it's someone you're close to, so you're affected, and the stress doesn't actually go away, so you need to deal with it. Very often with mental health problems, you need to talk to someone, and you need to be open enough to talk to people that can accept it, and that's where counselors or even therapists are important. But all these are what I call stress related. They are not mental illnesses. Of course, there are stress related mental illnesses, but they are biological problems in the brain. So, on the one hand, mental illness doesn't affect everyone in mental health. Behind mental health and mental illness, remember I said a three sided pyramid, the backside is always hidden, is stigma. Now, stigma is how the people view mental health, either problems or illnesses. And for a long time, this view has not been very positive. People don't understand. Mental illness, for example, is not just one condition. I gave you an example, depression, anxiety, but there are lots of other conditions, and so it's a group of conditions, and people misunderstanding why, because mental illnesses affect your feelings, affect your thinking, and affect your behavior. And when you have an illness, you behave, act, and feel in ways that are not what a person, say, a regular person on the street would behave. They behave differently. And because of that, it creates stigma. This is changing, obviously, the stigma that people have towards mental illness, because there's better understanding. We've done one study in 2014. In fact, there's another mental health literacy study that's occurring even now as we speak. So I believe that there has been improvements, and people are generally more accepting, which is what you alluded to. But on the other hand, self stigma is not something that you can resolve with knowledge. A lot of us um, may say, okay, I'm concerned about someone with mental illness or mental health problems, but not me. It's as long as it's somebody else. When it's me, I don't
Yeah.
seek help early. So in fact, we've studied this in large groups. We studied it in clinicians, in doctors. You know, doctors are notorious. The moment they have a mental illness, they don't seek help. In fact, when they have the same problem with physical illness, so the duration of untreated illness actually tends to be rather prolonged. And so that's something that we need to combat. That you need to seek help when you have a problem, when you have an illness,
Yeah.
and you can't do it
Oh,
yourself. I mean, just like if you get COVID, you can't treat
yep.
yourself. You know, it's not possible.
Yeah. It's interesting how you say,
I
stigma is something which we need to address. In recent years, as I said, the topic of mental illness, mental disorders, mental well-being has come to the forefront, especially with the pandemic. People are addressing it even more frequently now. I'm just wondering, when you said that a lot of people exercise self-stigma, they don't want to admit, or they don't want to approach for help. Um, is this the same among teens who are facing mental challenges, that they don't want to speak up, or they just want to keep it within themselves? Is self stigma doing that to them?
Yeah, so in fact, I spoke about the study that we did in 2014. That was a general population study. Actually, then, the stigma of mental illnesses and the knowledge and awareness of illnesses were poor. But when we studied teens in 2016, we had a youth study, a kind of a spin off from the main study. Young people were a lot more accepting and a lot more understanding, because they read up and they understood mental illnesses better. But they had self stigma. This is 2016. Has it changed? I hope so. And I'm hoping that, the more we are able to talk about it, the better it is. The problem, I think, has to be that these conversations need to be held in the places where young people congregate. So schools and in among in the community where young people are there. That conversation needs to be made, so that you help others who have mental illnesses and mental health problems. You learn to look out for them, you listen to them, and you link them to support. But at the same time, help yourself. right? So that you are willing to also get help should you develop. And the reality is that every one of us has a chance of developing a mental health problem. Not all of us will develop mental illnesses, but we all need to have an understanding, which I use the term mental health literacy, right? Very much like, you learn how to read, it's literacy, how to do numbers is numeracy, but mental health literacy, understanding the illnesses that exist, what are the potential risk factors, how do you prevent it? These are all very useful. And if you do develop one, what should you do? It's the same thing. If you have COVID-19, you do an ART test, and then you go and seek help from a doctor, and you need to isolate yourself because there are some risks. Otherwise, you'd spread to others in your family and people close to you. So vaccination, by the way, is the one preventive intervention that you can do for viral infection. Now, I'm using this, and you might be wondering, why am I talking about this? I'm trying to spread trying to teach. Well, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We said that, but I also want to use that analogy. Now, can you vaccinate against stress? Yes, you can. You can inoculate against stress by teaching how to manage stress. So that will deal with the mental health side of the house. You also need to learn that when someone develops a mental illness, you need to have understanding of the illness well, so that you can help them, not necessarily in the treatment, but help them get to responsible treatment opportunities, whether it's to see a mental health professional, taking medications, getting psychotherapy, or what we call psychosocial interventions, which will help them in their illness. Now, the all of this, whether it's stress or it's illness, it's around the brain. But let's imagine if it's stress, the brain learns to cope with it. And what happens is, a lot of people assume stress just affects your brain and nothing else. No, it is connected. So long-term stress actually affects your whole body, and you could potentially develop physical illnesses, for example, ulcers and so forth. So the brain is affected. It needs to learn to deal with stress. And this response by the brain is a whole body response. So it's very important. And learning how to cope with that, the mental health side of the house, is very important. All of us need these, almost like first aid skills that we would have for
Yeah.
physical illness. We need first aid for mental illness. On the other hand, for brain disorders that are caused by illness, that needs a more, I would say, evidence-based treatments, because it's actually an illness that needs treatment. And so that's why you need to seek a professional help. It's almost impossible to treat illness on your own.
Okay. Now, given your years in treating your patients, especially adolescents, what is the extent of the problem here in Singapore? We've seen reports after reports saying a lot of the teens are coming forward to report that they are suffering from stress, whether it's school, mental, peer pressure, education pressure. Can you paint or break down the numbers for us in terms of the number of cases that have come to light in the last few years?
So again, I talk to the two sides of that pyramid that we discussed. I think for the mental illness side of the house, mental illnesses in the young. Remember, mental illnesses as a whole. It's a very big group of conditions. Generally, have higher rates in the young, because that's when they start to develop, right? So mental illnesses are a disease of young people and young adults. So because they start young, the prevalence numbers are higher in the young. So anxiety, depression is higher than the population rate. So if I say 1 in 7 overall population, maybe it's 1 in 5 for children and young people. We've done a survey back in 2003. It's a long time ago. There's another one that is results are still pending. That's coming out from that NUS, and I reckon that you will see very similar rates to what we did 20 years ago. It's that 1 in 5 or 20% of the population may develop some kinds of mental illnesses that need treatment. The rest will have to deal with the mental health problems, and that really depends on the stresses of the day. So we are in the midst of a pandemic. Young people are affected by it because of two real things. Remember, the challenges of a young person is separation from their family, so they need to sort of gain some independence, go into the world out there, and then they also need to form relationships with other important people in their lives, their peers. Now, these two things, which are important challenges for someone to grow up, as completely impaired during this pandemic, right? They can't separate from the family because they stay home a lot, and it's difficult for them. They don't have sometimes the privacy, especially if you live in tiny homes in Singapore, and like 80% of us live in tiny homes, and then we have this lack of social isolation and lack of opportunities to actually physically and well, I mean, you can do it on Zoom, but it's not quite the same thing. Interact with young people of their own age, and learning to have those relationships. So I think these two things have added to the stress, and the mental health issues therefore become much more prominent.
What do you think will be the effects? As you said, they're suffering from isolation, not being with their friends, and forming the relationships, especially when you're a teenager, forming relationships so important. What will be the effects of these challenges right now, later on when they hit young adulthood?
Well, this is it's a developmental phase. So if you don't do your development well, then it affects. Like for example, you can put a child in an environment that has no stimulus. The child will be delayed, in development. So
Yeah,
what we are essentially saying is that their development's affected, and we need to try and reinstitute. Which is why we're trying to go endemic. We're trying to make sure everyone's vaccinated. Then we start to go back to life as usual. And I know I keep talking about vaccination because I really strongly believe that it's so important. And the evidence of vaccination being relatively safe is very high. I mean, if today you read the newspaper,
yeah,
there is an article that talks about the side effects and how people have claimed. It sounds like, at least from the article, that little post, that only two very serious outcomes have resulted from vaccination of about 4 over million people. So, sort of rest assured, many parents have asked me, is it safe to vaccinate?
yeah,
I'd say yes, so that they can meet other young people and continue their
yeah.
development. Just imagine, you
It's
can't
true.
Zoom all the time. You need to have those
Yeah,
live interactions, and school
yeah.
is an important place for that to happen.
Yeah, it's true. The social implications of vaccination. Not many people realize that when you are fully vaccinated, you're allowed to freely mix, with a restricted number of people. But at least there is human interaction. As you said, young people, teenagers, that's a big part of their growing up years. Now, I want to touch a little bit on the types of mental disorders, mental illness that our youths are facing today. You treat a whole range of
Hmm.
case. Mental illness, can be from anxiety disorders to schizophrenia. What are the most prevalent ones among our teens today?
Well, I have two ways of talking about this, but I'll keep it simple. I think there are three main groups of disorders that we should be concerned about. The first is emotional. Emotional disorders are largely focused on feelings. Doesn't mean that it has no effect on thinking and behavior, but it starts off with the feelings. And the most common emotional disorder is actually anxiety disorder. This is a kind of feeling of worries and fears that are so overwhelming that the person is almost paralyzed. It's and a young person with fears and worries, which is quite not uncommon in our part of the world, and the fears and worries are excessive. We all have fears and worries, right? We're afraid of the virus, or we're afraid of we'll fail our exams. That's normal fears.
Yeah,
But when the fears and worries become so overwhelming they are not able to function, that becomes an anxiety disorder, and that's quite common. So emotional disorders as a whole, anxiety disorders, if you don't treat it, becomes depression. That becomes the young person becomes a little bit more down, and even think of dying, and too much. They feel they cannot handle these fears and worries. So emotional disorders, big bucket, and great impact on young people, need to be identified and treated early. The second group is what I call behavioral disorders. So remember, I said feelings, behavior, right? So the behavioral disorders are associated with certain kinds of behaviors that you see in young people that are problematic, whether it's impulsive, it's hyperactivity, it's inattention and not paying attention in class. They manifest themselves. Most common behavioral disorder is what we call attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There are other behavioral disorders within this category, including conduct and oppositional defiant disorder, but that's ADHD is the most common, and sometimes they overlap. So behavioral disorders are important. They get picked up in school quite readily. So very young
Mm.
children will get picked up because the teacher will notice, oh, this child, there's it's a little out of hand. We can't manage. They cannot sit
Yeah.
still. They're always on the move. They're like an engine. Okay, so that's the second category. The third category is the thinking problems. So what are the thinking problems? Cognitive related, and they are what we call developmental disorders. So developmental disorders, there are a variety. The most common and or most well known is the autism spectrum disorder. So autism spectrum disorders are associated with developmentally their ability to socialize and understand social cues are impaired. And then associated with that, they may have certain kind of very rigid behaviors, and also have difficulties with their imagination and this developmental group has a lot of problems interacting. In some of them, they have learning disabilities associated with it. So they cannot, their IQ is lower. They have difficulties learning in mainstream school and may need some additional support.
Mm.
And in this group of children, the key is education. So this cognitively challenged group usually get picked up quite early, especially today.
Mm.
We have systems in place for early identification
Mm.
in the community, even in preschool age, and they get picked up for help. Now they do develop other issues subsequently. Sometimes you can get epilepsy, for example, or which is a medical condition, needs to be treated because that's a very generalized fit, or you may have difficulties with their social interactions and therefore result in emotional disorders associated with it. So there are important three main groups. Developmental disorders
Mm.
start early. You pick them up, and intellectual disability is one major group as well, right? So they have
Mm.
learning problems. They're picked up in school. The
Mm.
behavioral disorders get picked up early because of the disruption that they cause to the, in social settings. So people get to notice them. The one that we miss a lot is the emotional disorders because they are internal to the child,
Yes.
and unless you know the child well, you may not pick it up. So I would put it broadly
Mm.
in these three groups. The most common
Mm.
actually is anxiety and depression, which is in the emotional category.
Okay, just to follow up, when you told us about these three main groups of mental disorders and mental illnesses, do parents know how to pick it up? The patients that you have and you treat, do the parents realize it in the beginning, or do they come to you way too late, or did they not pick up any clues, or is they just take it that it was just part and parcel of growing up? My kid is just trying to find his way in the world. So what are the attitudes of parents when, as you said, this literature is probably very widespread, and now there are so many experts you can speak with, but what are the parents' attitude towards such things as the mental disorders that you've actually listed?
No, I think it's well, attitude is one thing. I mean, like I said, parents always want to help their children, and they always see their children in a good light. Um, I always advise parents to take a holistic view. So I have 5 points that to help. Look at the symptoms, right? Because if you notice, a child may be worried about a particular exam or incident, and that's just over something that they think is very important. That's one incident. It needs to be, fairly severe in terms of its symptomatology. I mean, if I have worries before my exam and I can't sleep the night before, that's probably normal. But if every day I'm worried and I can't sleep, and for weeks on end, I'd be, a bit more concerned. So severity of symptoms. The second, of course, is that it should be relatively pervasive. It should occur in more than one situation, not just in front of the parent, but also in school, and noticed by multiple informants. Then number three is it needs to persist, right? We all have odd behaviors and feelings and and thinking from time to time. Depends on the situation. You just watch a weird movie and it might feel very scared. So it needs to persist for at least 2 weeks, right, as a start. And then next, it
Yes.
should impact on functioning. That means the child is not able to function in their day to day. And then finally, of course, is that you can't explain it. You just there's no. We tried everything, and the child is still like this. So when you have all these things, the clues are there. It's in your face. Parents need to accept there is some degree of denial, particularly for developmental disorders. I often see parents saying, maybe he's a bit slow. Give him some time. He's a late bloomer, and I'm always willing to do that. I think schools have our school system now has really laxed a little bit more in the first couple of years of school, largely because we want children to have fun, and not just what we used to do is we really pack into school, right? So now there's a bit of a, and this is quite consistent with around the world. I mean, kids need time to play and enjoy themselves, but at some point they need to have certain skill sets. So watching the children develop, so have an understanding. Those five things that I would look at, and then trust your teachers. Teachers have seen more children than the parents. I mean, most of us. I mean, you have two, I have five. That's not a lot, right? Teachers have seen more, tens, 20. So when the teacher says, "I'm
Yes.
concerned about this," that's your first clue,
Yeah.
right? That something might
Yep.
be at hand.
I guess it's a working relationship between, as you said, people who spend a lot of time with our kids, the teachers, their friends. If you speak with their friends, and if you see your kid, you need to sort of like find out a little bit more about it, and then do an proactive approach to maybe seek help. That you must take the first
Mm.
step to find out.
Oh yeah, I
Well,
mean there are
I'm
many. Oh, I was just going to say that many parents sometimes they just rely on their personal experience. They will say, "Oh, there's something wrong with my child," because when they come home, and they were talking about teenagers, they come home, they
yeah.
go to their room, and then they're always there. Are they, maybe they're depressed, and they're not talking very much.
Yes.
But if that's only with you, but then if they still interact very well with their friends, then I would be very careful about sort of over-diagnosing this. Yeah, you're going to
True.
talk about question, I think.
Yes, that's right. We've got a couple
Yeah.
of questions from our participants here. The first one comes from Yuna. Now, do social media platforms actually lead to a higher level of teenagers facing this isolation issues that we talked about just now and mental illness? Now, is this legitimate in any real time studies done in Singapore with regards to this?
You, do social media platforms lead to higher level of isolation? Okay, so we've done studies where we looked at not so much social media but video gaming. And a lot of times in the past, people used to say, okay, if you're depressed, if you're anxious, if you have mental illness, you'll then go and gravitate towards these video games, and you play more games. When we studied this longitudinally, and this was a large cohort back in a couple of years back, we actually saw the trend wasn't this way. People who play games a lot start to develop depression and anxiety, not the other way around. In fact, you would understand, because if you have a mental illness, your functioning drops, and playing a video game or going on social media is something that you need to be fairly functional. So I would think it's the other way around. They are the result of over spending too much time online. Years ago in the 80s, there used to be this term we used when computers first developed. And I was one of those geeky teenagers who was really interested in this. And computer addiction was basically spending time online writing code. Right, and there was a
Yes.
category. They spent so much time online that that the whole life became unbalanced, and then they developed problems. So it is quite the other way around. Social media platforms offer young people opportunities for socializing, But it's different
Mm,
in the socializing of these platforms, and there are some risks involved because, firstly, you are exposed to a global perspective, not a
mm,
specific cultural Singaporean perspective. And some of the things you learn there can affect you and change you. So we've read about 16-year-old who was radicalized, right, online.
yes.
It's because of social media that has a powerful effect. So one must be aware and of the risk, and of course, there's a lot of other risks. Meeting strangers, sexual exploitation, even cyberbullying, which is not more common than normal bullying. But normal bullying, it's in the context of a school. Cyberbullying, you've got the
Mm,
whole community of the world potentially bullying you.
that's right.
So these are
Mm,
risks that the platforms will result in problems. But by and
mm,
large, going onto these platforms are part of life. So we need to allow our young people to do that, but within certain constraints of safety, which I think parents need to understand. So parents need to get on it themselves. But most teenagers would not allow their parents to friend them unless they create some kind of fake site, I suspect. So that's that balance of privacy and but knowledge and understanding is helpful for parents. Yeah.
Yes, I echo that. It's still a constant struggle at my home trying to control my kids and their social media time and, what they log on to, what they read, because now going into young adulthood, they form their own opinions. And as you said, technology sometimes to the older generation can be a little bit intimidating, but I think we need to get on with it. We need to try, as you said, to actually understand where the platforms that they frequent and maybe try to engage that. So recently I was on TikTok, so my daughters decided to say, hey, I make you a TikTok account. It's really easy, and I think I have been enjoying it, and I tend to understand what they're actually liking and not liking, and some of their opinions and the comments that they give. I do read them, so I begin to understand a little bit more where they're going towards and the opinions that they form. So yeah, you're right, we need to get on with it. With the technology. Now, a second question comes from Siu Eng. Siu Eng asks, how to improve our social interaction with the safe management measures in place. So we've got the numbers restricted to 5, and then 1.5 meters away. Social distancing. What are some other recommendations, maybe, Prof, to improve our social
Well, I mean the
interaction?
rules. There are always rules, right? So we work within the rules. I mean, I believe that there's still a lot of freedom. You can meet in groups of 5, so it's not like you can't meet. I mean, at one stage we could only meet in twos. So groups of 5, and if you go to a friend's house, it could be 6 or 7, right? So there are opportunities of meeting young people, and then they should continue to do that. They can, I think, take part in certain activities. Sports, I think they have higher numbers, right, in playing games.
Mm,
So some of these things can continue. I think we should work within the constraints of the rules. Should not allow these rules to, sort of stop socializing. We should socialize. I mean, I come from a big family, and it's a real difficulty for me to meet everyone in the family. And we've been doing this for 2 years. It's tiring sometimes. You wish it could be
mhm,
simpler, but this is part of life. What we call the new normal. Let's live with it. Let's embrace it, and let's continue. Don't because we are now all afraid and then we don't interact. Let's take the opportunities. It means that instead of one meeting, you need 2 meetings, but you can still meet,
mm,
and you can arrange your day that way. So I would encourage young people to continue to socialize and make friends, and you can also do hybrid, right? So me. I'm going to meet these 5 these 4 friends, and then tomorrow I'm going to meet these other 4. But the rest can join us, through Zoom
yeah,
or other WhatsApp, or So
true,
it,
true.
it's up to our own imagination to make it happen.
Yes, I experienced my first virtual party when my daughter said that I'm attending a party, and I say it's a pandemic. You can't attend a party. No, 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 no. 20 of us are meeting online, and we're just getting our refreshments, and we're playing music. And she showed me how it was done, and I thought they had a lot of fun. So I said, okay.
Yeah,
No
yeah,
money on my
yeah. In
part,
fact,
so I'm happy about that.
yeah, there are new sites that have started to do this. So you come in with the avatar. It's almost like a
Yes.
metaverse, lah, in a way.
Yes, true, true. Okay, we have another question too here. Do you think that parents are a little bit jumpy when they are treating and wanting to uh, treat mental health condition among their kids? They expect a fast fix with very little patience, especially when their child is involved in numerous incidences in school. So they just want to cure it, put a stop to it, and that's it. How would you think parents can prepare themselves for the long run for complex conditions?
I think the important thing is to recognize that if it's an illness, most mental illnesses are what I call either chronic or waxing and waning. What do I mean? Chronic means it's long term, like you've got high blood pressure or diabetes. You need to. It's in the long haul. There's a lifestyle change. There's medications to take. So that's important to understand if it's a chronic illness. If it's a wax and wane, yeah, you deal with the illness at that point in time, but it may come back. So you must be prepared for that. I gave you a few examples. Anxiety disorders are probably a wax and wane kind of condition. You may not cure it, but you can teach skills to cope with it. It doesn't have to become chronic. Same with depression and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It gets better with age because you learn skill sets, but it's also fairly chronic. And then if it's a developmental disorder, it's going to be a lifelong thing. It's just learning to cope. It's like if I cut off your arm, you learn to cope with it. You're not going to sit there and say, okay, I can't do anything. But you can't grow a new arm. So quick solutions for mental illnesses are difficult. A quick fix would help with mental health conditions or mental health, not conditions, but mental health problems, right? Right, when it's stress related. Then, if you can help to deal with the stress. Now, stress isn't all bad. Okay, some stress is actually good. It's important to have a bit of stress, and all of us need that bit of stress. Just like bacteria and viruses are not all bad. We have some bacteria and viruses that are coexisting with us. Our body learns to deal with it, and it doesn't infect you. It just stays with you, and it helps you, make your gut better. You can,
Mm,
help to digest your food better. And in fact, we call them probiotics, which is actually bacteria. So there are good stress that will help us, and we need these
mm,
stresses to build resilience. So young people need to learn to deal with stress and not to be have a stress free. This is what I started off earlier talking about overprotection. We mustn't overprotect
mm,
our kids, because then
yeah,
if you take all the stress away, they won't grow and they won't have resilience.
mm,
When the real stress comes, it's like the boy who cried wolf. You won't be able
mm,
to deal with it because the real problem can be so immense. But if you've had chances to deal with stress, with failure, then you are able to cope better. So resilience actually needs to be tested. So a few ways of controlling failure is to allow them to fail in school, but learn from those
yes.
failures. So successful failure is important.
I guess mental resilience is a work in progress, and it's the very starting fundamental of any kid. When you, as a parent, you do want to concentrate and focus your time on building the mental resilience, as you said. I think it's important because the rewards and the effects is long lasting, and it only shows when they go into teenage years and adulthood. I guess it's not something that if you haven't been actively trying to focus on mental resilience, is it something where you can, when the problem becomes too overwhelming, is mental resilience something where you can quickly fix?
Um, you can't fix resilience. You can only offer
Mm,
opportunities for learning. Resilience is it's like when it takes stress, it copes, it bounces back, it doesn't break, right?
mm,
So to get resilience, you need stress, you need challenges, and um, and of course you need to understand the young person to see what they can take. I mean,
mm,
it's like a plant, right? When
yeah,
they first come out, the shoots are really fragile, and you just bend them, break already. But when they get
yep,
older, they're stronger. But you still need
yeah,
to bend them so that you practice, right? Otherwise, one day the storm comes, some of the trees will get uprooted very easily, whereas others with strong roots and they will stay in place. And how do they get the strong roots? Because they get buffeted by the normal winds and they're tested. So what we want is for the kids to learn to cope. Of course, there are some stresses that all of us will break down, very traumatic
Mm,
stress, but these are uncommon. But we need to deal
mm,
with the day to day. Like, if someone scolds you or gives you a bad time, can you deal with that? That's important. If a child doesn't get scolding before, then the first time they get
yes.
scolded in school, they might want to go and kill themselves. So I think it's important
True.
to have that understanding.
Yeah. I guess we need to let go when they want to learn that experience. We need not protect them too much. Or, some parents might be too afraid. I don't want to, my child to get, to get hurt too much. And therefore the overprotectiveness instinct comes
Mm.
in. So as you said, we need to learn to let go and let them go through that feeling and that emotion and how to overcome it. That will be a mechanism that will serve them well, probably when they, grow up into the teenage years and adulthood. Okay, I'm taking another question
I
from
was gonna, I
Jeff
was
this
gonna, I,
time
wa-
around.
I was gonna chip in one
Yes,
more point here. Uh,
yes,
that's why you have two parents, right? Majority of the time, you have two parents. Why? Because one parent will be the protective one, whereas the other may be a bit more easygoing. And I'm not mentioning any gender here, but it's important
yes,
to allow the
yeah,
parents to sort of interact that way, so that there's the
mm,
I generally, mothers tend to be very nurturing, but they are
sure,
very effective in a young child. When the child gets to teenage years, you may need a bit of the dad. Often, the father has a little bit more. Okay, never mind. Let them, suffer the consequence a little bit and learn.
yes.
I'm not trying to stereotype gender here. Some fathers and mothers flip that. So either way, it's
Mm.
helpful.
Mm. Okay, another
Yeah.
question, this time I think from Larry. What do you think would be a suggested first stop to explore if further help is needed? Are there GPs for mental health today? Are GPs equipped to address the problem?
Indeed. Okay, so when I say mental health professionals, maybe I should define it a little bit. We have different grades of mental health professionals. There is the primary care, which is the entry point to healthcare. It's in fact our family doctors, whether they're working in polyclinics or in private GP practices, and a group of them also get training in mental health. We've got a graduate diploma in mental health in IMH, and so that's basic training. Actually, all doctors today, when they go through medical school, they have some training, so they are able to sort of identify, and in simple cases of mental illnesses, they can treat, right? Before they then refer to psychiatrists and psychologists. Now, psychiatrists, we have about 270 in Singapore, thereabouts, maybe a little less than that. So if everyone with a potential mental illness, and we just said how common it is, if it's
Mm,
20% of the population, that's a lot of young people. You might not just want to go straight to psychiatrist. That will overwhelm the
yeah.
psychiatrist. Psychiatrists should be treating the,
Mm,
the very difficult ones. Clinical psychologists, they are a very specific group of psychologists. There are not that many of them, a couple of hundred in Singapore, and they support the psychiatrists. They do more of the talking therapies. So, for example, the most common talking therapy is cognitive behavior therapy. So that will need a bit
mhm,
of time. You need weekly to two weekly sessions for a period of about 3 months. So that kind of interventions also, even if you have a few hundred, if everyone goes to them, they would be overwhelmed. So I think it's important to understand mental health professionals in working in
mm,
specialized clinics will be the highest tier. But you start off with primary care as the first tier. And then there's also community agencies, which we've developed over the years, which have skill sets to identify and also treat. And they could be family service centers, they could be specific youth centric social service agencies that can also treat mild forms of anxiety and depression. And they have
mm.
clinical psychologists within their ranks. So those are some possibilities for help. Not every. I think Larry's question is not Larry. It's Jeff's question about
Jeff
one
is Jeff,
stop.
yeah.
Yeah, about having a one stop.
One stop.
I would say two places. The school, the school has school counselors who are trained
Mm,
to help. So if it's coming from the parents, I'd say go to school, work with the school counselors. We've got teams that work with the schools. They call it Reach. They
Yeah.
go to every school has got a team member that comes from the mental health services of all three clusters of healthcare providers. So depending on where the school is, it's regionally constructed. Then we have the GPs, right? The GPs have some training as well, and so that would be the first potential stop. And I think the it's important to have an integrated approach to this. Like someone who has a lot of anxiety, they can have a medical problem. So seeing a doctor is helpful in some of these instances.
I guess identifying the problem and actually making that first step to seek help from a professional, and then maybe get reference from that, the follow-ups and all, is something where parents need to actively seek out. Now, another question here from Vincent: how do you convince our youth to seek help? As you said, there are counselors in school, there are agencies that
Right.
schools work with, but then if as you said, self stigma is very real, how do you encourage your child to go seek help if they don't want to talk to you?
No, so I think over the years, I realized that when we were developing the Reach program, the whole idea was to have this help seeking opportunity through the school counselor. We would get them into services, and then we would triage and then go up into the depending on severity, what kind of services are needed. What I've
Mm,
learned actually is that this is one way, but you need different strokes for different kids. So some young
yeah.
people prefer to the age where is democratized, and so in such an age, the young person may need to find out for themselves first before they seek help.
Mm,
So having resources online is helpful. We've developed a online resource called mindline.sg with the Ministry of Health's Office of Healthcare Transformation. So this mindline.sg, you can go on it. It has a chatbot which has been tested out in institutes of higher learning, actually, some of the polytechnics, and it's been quite effective. It's actually an AI enabled chatbot that can. It's called Wiser, WYSA, and this chatbot can talk you through. So this is one way to get information, self help with resources. The other way, of course, is drop-in centers. We've been developing this for over 10 years now, and the most well known is the hub that is at the skate park. It's called
mm,
Chat, and it's a community health assessment team, and they have a kind of a fuss-free, anonymous, confidential evaluation. If you suspect you've got a problem, we'll talk to you. It's not a clinical evaluation. You're not seeing a doctor. Not well. You're seeing a clinician, but in a community setting. And we're developing more of these in the next couple of years to be around. So if you just you can Google Chat, you'll see that program. So it's a drop-in center for young people, and that
mm,
might be the other way. So self-help, self-seeking of information, um, drop-in centers, and school-based. The third area, which
mm.
is going to be developed in the next couple of years, is really we're going to train mental health literacy. It's been announced. The Ministry of Education is
Yes.
going to start having that curriculum drawn in. Now, once you start to have that, you can have help within the school amongst peers. So, peer support and buddy systems would be very useful because then we can teach young people. Remember, they're quite willing to help others. So, if they can watch out for one another, they would also be another source of potential help seeking. So we're hoping that this would create this comprehensive network or ecosystem of help for young people that will get them to help as needed. It's not perfect. There might be gaps still in that. We will, we need everyone on board. That includes the school, the healthcare agencies, and parents, and eventually peers as well, young people themselves coming forward and helping.
It's always good that mental health literacy is increasing in our society. I think as schools come forward with it, Ministry of Education and all the other agencies come forward to offer their help and continue this conversation, I think mental health is something that all of us should, uh, you know, address and focus in our lives. Now, let's go on to another question by Debbie. How prevalent is self harm in children in Singapore, and how best to assist them? Are there certain treatments that specifically help on this? The issue of self harm.
Well, I mean, I asked, firstly, I think it's, yeah, I know what you mean. I'm just trying to, sort of challenge you a little bit. How frequent is tattooing or piercing? Is that self harm too? So I think at some point we have a lot of young people who have learned. Again, this is on in social media and also through one another. That this is one way of dealing with stress, and it's not a good way. It's what I would consider a maladaptive way. So cutting yourself to sort of deal with your emotional pain is one method that people have resorted to, and young people, and they sometimes learn from one another. But I mean, young people also tattoo themselves and have piercings and all that. So my question, of course, is what is self harm, and how do you define it as a concept? If you smoke, is it self harm? If you eat unhealthy food, is it self harm? Is it or is it just self injurious behavior alone? So that's one question you have to ask. I think if we are talking about self harm in relation to dealing with emotional pain, it's not a good way. There are other ways that you can do the same thing. I'll tell you the mechanism of how this works. If you cut yourself, there's pain. Physical pain results in your body releasing its natural painkillers. It's called endorphins. And if you
Mm,
do this often enough, you get, this painkillers get released. It's kind of a calming effect. And some people say, oh, when I do that, I feel better. So is there another way to sort of get the same mechanism at play? Well, high activity sports. I mean, what do you high? What's the word for it? The very intense sports, right? For example, running and swimming distances, you can create the same effect. So I would encourage a more adaptive way of creating this. So when I feel bad, I go for a jog and I feel better when I come home. The reason is very simple. Your body releases endorphins to make you um, feel better. So generally, is self harm a bad thing? If it's in that context, it is
mm,
maladaptive. Best to transfer it. But self harm could also be a sign that I want to die. Now that's very different. If I want to kill myself and I'm killing myself, then that's more worrying. That's a sign that there's a risk. And
yeah.
the people who start to hurt themselves that way would have, before they did it, articulated that they are feeling very frustrated and they want to die. Unfortunately, in today's context, people talk of dying much more frequently than in the past. I mean, in the past,
Yes.
I would read it in literature and always wonder as a child, what is Hamlet saying, to be or not to be? And but those are the challenges that young people today, they're deluged
Yeah.
with this. Whenever I can't deal with something, I kill myself. And I think that there's a certain degree of sort of transmission of this kind of concept, that there is overemphasis, over talking about it. So if self-harm is leaning towards suicidality, then we have to be a bit more careful. We need to, if a young person comes and says, I want to die, it's different from, I'm feeling very upset and I'm just doing this to make myself feel better. It's two different things. If I want to die, and parents must not be afraid to ask their child, do you think of dying? We've
Yep.
done a survey in the population. About 20% of young people do have thoughts, fleeting very often,
Yep.
of dying. But that doesn't
Yep.
mean that they actually actively want to kill themselves. But there are also young people who
Mm,
say, I'm planning to kill myself and I've got this plan. But
mm,
by and large, when someone tells you they want to kill themselves, it is not directly talking about them wanting to die, but more in asking you, the person that they confided in, can you help me? I feel like dying.
mm.
That's what I think most of because the real truly suicidal person will not tell anyone. They will hide
Yep.
and then they will kill themselves. And of course, sometimes you can they're fortunate. The method that they use, not that fatal. They survive, but everybody will say, "Oh, I didn't know," And that's the ones that you're more worried. The ones who come up and say, "Look, I want to kill myself," is actually telling you, please help me, I want to die. And that's where
Mm.
parents, teachers, professionals need to help. So there's a difference between self-harm and suicide.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, we have another question from EE. Now, in cases where school counselors, GP, social counselor, etc., they can't manage and refer to the Institute of Mental Health. Now, the waiting time, EE says, is 8 months before they can consult with a professional. Is that the case, Prof, at IMH?
I don't think it's 8 months. I think 8 months is a bit excessive. There is a triage process, as far as I know.
Yeah,
So there might be it may be 8 months because there is it's not seen as something urgent. I would recommend first of all going to your GP or polyclinic to have an evaluation or to speak to your school counselor if the child is going to school as a first cut. 8 months is very long, but it's likely that they will give an appointment, because there is a long waiting time today for non-urgent cases, and this
yeah,
is this is an unfortunate thing. We're trying to solve it. I don't think 8 months is acceptable either, even if it's non-urgent. But it may be that the
yeah,
parent insists on seeing the mental health professional when there are other options. I would normally say, like I said, you shouldn't self-diagnose. You need to get to a professional who will help, and we do have systems in place to
mm,
assist. I mean, like I said, for the mental health side of the house, it's the whole population. And you are talking about, in Singapore, young people below the age of 19, we're talking about almost a million, right? So everyone may have mental health problems, but not all mental health problems need to get mental health professionals. So it's just that balance. I'm sorry that you have to wait 8 months. You can email me. I'll try and check up on my email is available in the government directory. So I do not think that 8 months is reasonable. Yeah.
you will regret you said that. Getting the
No, I'm
emails.
fine.
Okay. All right. Another
Yeah.
person for Su Sing. Now, he's asked, do you think the school counselors are doing enough? From your experience and observations, what more do you think schools can do to support youths? If our kids are not speaking to us and don't want to communicate with us, I guess, the next contact will be within the school environment. So do you think the counselors are inundated?
Somewhat yes and no. I mean, in 2008, before 2008, there were no school counselors. So we have now every school at least one. Depending on the school population, there are more. I mean, I don't speak for the ministry, but I believe that there is sort of increasing awareness of needs, and there are also allied educators that support the school counselors. So there's an actual a pastoral team that looks after students. Is that enough? Yes and no, lah, because there is enough, some more than before. But what is enough, right? So I think
Yeah.
there is a need for teachers to obviously participate in this process, and for parents too. And then I said there was a need also to get peers trained. So hopefully that would give sufficient resource at the front end. And then if we create other kind of ecosystem supports, whether it's online and other social service agencies, we may be able to create sufficient support system. I'm not entirely sure what's needed. I mean, we can't have everyone become mental health professionals. Then what will happen to the engineers and other kind of jobs that we need in our world? So it's always a balance. But
Mm.
the fortunate thing is that we have an educated population. We have you guys as parents, right? Who's
Yeah.
trying to understand things better. So you all can sort of chip in. And there's I mean, in schools there's a huge volunteer corps of parents. This is an example of what parents can do. This is completely parent run, and it's wonderful. So what we need is
Yeah.
more of some of this. Parents do a lot for
Yeah.
the. I think in exam times, sometimes they cook food and then give the students. They
Yeah.
could also be a resource to support the counselors, right? Parents
Yeah.
who have been trained or who are willing. Yeah.
Yes, true. I mean, the thing is that I found a lot of comfort when I joined the parent support group of my girls' school. So that helped me a lot in terms of steering my parenting journey. And I think recently, the Ministry of Education has launched a mental well-being resource to help the members of the parent support group. So I think joining such support organizations will also be another resource in increasing your mental well-being literacy. Okay, we'll go to another question by Kenneth. Now, he says that we had a tragic case where a child was attacked physically by another in school last year. Is there anything that parents, educators, mental health practitioners, and the community can do together to eliminate the chance of a recurrence when it, ends in a fatality? That's always, very intense.
Yeah, I know you're talking about the River Valley incident, and I think the key thing here is to recognize that we all have a part to play. So identifying young people who need help. I use the three L's in it to look out for people in distress or having difficulties, and make sure that the symptoms are severe enough. They have sufficient sort of persistence of symptoms and pervasiveness, and they are not functioning very well. This is our opportunity to help them, and then we will have to listen to their issues, and then link them up to support. So I think it is possible creating this ecosystem. Um, um, I did write an article in the paper, with regards to that. I believe that we can do more, but these incidents just, to me, it just tells us
Mm.
that we should do more, and we need everyone to participate in this process. I'm also aware that time is running out, and it's very stressful to try and talk long. That's the,
Yes,
that's
that's right.
the
We'll
time
definitely will
pressure. Yeah.
Yes, we'll definitely continue this conversation, Prof. And on that note, we have concluded our very first FB session on the parenting topic of handling mental stress among our teens. This session has been brought to you by our new parent support group, Makan Already. And a big thank you to you, Prof. Daniel Fung, CEO at the Institute of Mental Health Singapore, for joining us this morning and lending your expertise and giving us some insights on how to support our teens' mental health challenges. Now, we hope with the tips, guidelines, and advice that have been discussed, you are empowered to carry on your parenting journey with more confidence, a little more love, and a tad more laughter. Well, we're grateful for all the questions too, and we hope this conversation will continue long after this episode is over. We all know that parenting is always a work in progress, and we here at Makan Already want to take this journey with you. So please make a date with us again in 2 months' time, 12th of March. Put that down on your calendar for another live FB event, this time with celebrity couple Darren Lim and Evelyn Tan. They will share with us their unique parenting journey on the high seas with their 4 kids. Till then, stay safe and healthy. Have a good weekend.
Bye. Okay. Yeah. Okay.